bright light in my week.
Good. Well, we're excited to have you. I appreciate you being on. We're pretty much right on schedule, so let's get rolling. I have pages of notes that I need to go through with you here of all the things I want to talk about.
Okay.
But let's start with the very few listeners that we have who don't know who you are. Why don't you give me a little background on you and tell us about what you do and your areas of expertise and such.
Absolutely. So my background is in exercise science. I got my bachelor's degree in exercise science, pre-physical therapy. Been in the fitness industry for 10 years, started at 24 Hour Fitness. I looked like the least likely person in the gym to help you with your fitness. Quickly navigated towards corrective exercise. Physical therapy school did not work out for me. That's another presentation for another time. But I became a body worker through anatomy trains, combined that with corrective exercise and health coaching. I started, well, even before exercise, I was pretty overweight as a kid, lost weight playing active video games like Dance Dance Revolution. And I've always been interested in neuroscience. So I started with animal behavior before I got into exercise science. Full circle, as I was doing my practice, I really noticed that people struggle with cognitive issues, attention, memory, focus, processing speed. And I wanted to find out how I could, as a health and fitness professional, with all these tools, as a health coach, a body worker, a trainer, be able to help these individuals. And so that kind of led me down a path of researching all things exercise and lifestyle in the brain. I quickly realized that there was not a lot, virtually nothing in the fitness industry that helped us understand the brain. And even though I think it was pretty widely known and is widely known that exercise is good for the brain, it's more touted as a side effect, and there's not much different stuff that you do about it, right? So it doesn't change your programming like anything else in the industry would or should, right? And so that kind of made me upset. I saw a lot of neuroscientists speaking to the fitness industry or speaking about fitness, not being personal trainers, not being in the fitness industry. And I saw an opportunity for us to, and when I say us, I mean our industry, to make a significant difference on those with cognitive concerns. And that might be people like you or me who care about our brains, because that's how we do our jobs like everybody else. And it can be people with cognitive impairments, and it can be people with dementia. And so we'll talk about some statistics today of how I think we can literally make a dent on this epidemic of issues surrounding or having to do with the mind and brain. So finishing up a master's in neuroscience, I work at a place called the Pacific Brain Health Center in Santa Monica, where I run a brain gym, where the only goal of this gym is to improve brain health via exercise. And we have people that all the way from normal to demented with MS, Parkinson's, et cetera, come to us, and we get to use exercise and cognitive training and resistance training to improve cognitive and brain health outcomes. So fun stuff.
Yeah. So you were talking full circle there. What did you say about animal behavior?
It was pretty interesting. I grew up watching movies like Air Bud and Homeward Bound and all those 90s talking animal movies. And probably like many children, I want to work in the animal industry in movies so I can like work with animals all day. And like, that wasn't like a childhood dream that dissipated, that like stayed with me till college. And my hometown, Moore Park, California, it's the only community college with an exotic animal training and management program.
What?
Yeah, where you literally learn.
That's cool.
Yeah, right. And so I applied. I did really well in the classes, but because it's a community college, it's a lottery, so they can't select like a private college, and I didn't get in. And as soon as I got rejected, I'm like, well, I just lost a bunch of weight. Here's this amazing personal training program from this guy, Jeff Kryle, who worked for NASM in early days and wanted to create like a trade school version of a personal training program. It's probably one of the best ones at a community college in the nation. And I had the pleasure of being an early participant in that program.
Nice.
So that's kind of how I came full circle, if you will. But
That's
I was
cool.
watching before getting my cert, I was like taking notes, watching a water buffalo, like 8:45 a.m. chewing cud, 8:53 a.m. chewing more cud. Sometimes it wasn't all it was chalked up to be. You know?
Yeah, I don't know, 2 years now, you and I have been chatting and talking and weekly calls, and I have no idea. I didn't know any of that. So
yeah, cool. Sometimes I assume I tell that story, and sometimes I haven't.
Yeah, so, that's good stuff. Well, I know you'd mentioned earlier you might have a couple of slides to kind of show us, but I want to, you know me and the way that my brain works. I like statistics and I like my diagrams and I like my stuff that kind of shows me. So I know I'm speaking your language there a little bit.
Right.
Maybe putting you on the spot if you're not prepared, but do you have a little bit of something for us that can kind of explain?
I have probably more than you would want.
Okay, good. So to from the layman on, like, let's just kind of get the idea of when you reference cognitive training. And then also specific to my target audience, which most of the people on here kind of come from, they're the followers of social media, both of us, of course, but we're looking at things from a resistance training component. So I think that's one of the first times you and I were sitting at a mastermind and we ended up getting seated next to each other. And someone was talking about resistance and I was like, yeah, I like that. And then someone said something cognitive and you're like, yeah, I like that. And those two things, they fit. And I was like, what? And you're like, yeah, this is what I do. And I said, this is what I do. And then next thing I know, we're off and going, and pretty much the rest of the party kind of zoned out. And you and I just talked and shared notes and really discussed the idea of, how great a relationship cognitive training and the result of via resistance training, how well those work together. So
that's right.
Take away there if you have you want to take over your screen and share anything with us.
Yeah, I do.
Awesome.
And today might be a little bit more different than you intended. I typically talk about cognitive training, brain health, and things of that regard. But I really wanted to spend time I kind of take advantage of this opportunity to really focus on resistance training.
Good,
and
man.
Contextualize it completely in the sense of brain health. And
I love it.
It's something that I typically don't get to do because I'm usually framing the whole thing. And by the whole thing, I mean this whole vision of brain health. And you have to talk about basic neuroanatomy and talk about other forms of exercise and then introduce cognitive training because people want the brain games. But I never really have gotten the chance to really hone in on resistance training and its relationship with the brain. And I am such a huge fan of it. It's part of my lifestyle. I think we know that older adults specifically do not incorporate enough of this. And also people at a high risk for dementia should be incorporating this, but often don't. And I think 3/4 of the people who are going to have dementia are likely to be women. And those women also are unlikely to do resistance training. I spend a lot of my time coaching people for brain health and helping, not delivering the exercise programs, but like creating them and recommending what their exercise prescription is for brain health. And most of the people I talk to are women, and virtually none of them I talk to do resistance training. And I don't think it's a surprise, but these are people that are a higher risk for dementia. And so I think it's not about women, but it's certainly a significant issue. And so whether it's, ageism or sexism, and we think, because of the era in which these people grew up, resistance training had this bias or this thought that it's not good for you. You don't need it. It's about toning. But really what I was so excited revisiting some of the research last night was, wow, resistance training is super potent for brain health and no one does enough of it typically, right? Nice. And so we're going to talk about that today. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we don't have to go over everything. Certainly, if anyone here has seen what I've talked about before, we talk about cognitive decline, the epidemic, an overview of exercise in the brain. Items 4 and 5, resistance training and brain health, and exercise prescription is what I want to get to today. There's some other information that we can review, but it's going to be pretty fast and that can seem overwhelming. But there's a lot of other webinars I've done where I slow down and go over that stuff in detail. Background, who cares? Okay. So, so this graphic is just demonstrating the significant prevalence of dementia rates across the world in 2015, 2030, and 2050. So we can see that the Americas are taking second place of about 30 million people by 2050 that are going to be diagnosed with dementia. So this is a significant increase in dementia cases. Right now, or at least in 2019, there's 5.8 million cases of dementia. And I wanted to sort of make a point whether the fitness industry can actually make an impact or not. There's about 350,000 trainers or so. If we actually make a ratio out of that, it's a 16-to-1 ratio. So if every single personal trainer in the fitness industry, and that's not including health coaches and clinicians that could also recommend exercise, right? And I'm not saying that we all work with people with dementia. It's just a convenient number. It's a 16-to-1 ratio. We could, in the World Health Organization, puts exercise at the tip top of things that are evidence-based that can make an impact on slowing cognitive decline. Yet it's usually the last thing people have as part of their brain health plan. Supplements are at the bottom. Most people are doing that first, right? Every single person I've talked to over the past 3 years, rarely, if at all, regardless of socioeconomic status, prior experience, even having a personal trainer or physical therapist, does not have an ideal exercise program for brain health. Not a single one. And so there is a huge gap in exercise prescription for brain health, about education, both with the end users and with trainers. And so this is what motivates me day in, day out, is that if we can educate every single trainer, even just to refer or understand for brain health, right, we can make a significant dent. And I find that extremely encouraging. And by the way, there's not even enough doctors to diagnose all the people we will need to diagnose or care for all the people we will need to care for in the future. Yet personal training can play a massive role in this. So I find that extremely motivating. Nice. I hope everyone does too. Just to give an idea of what I'm talking about, some people, when I talk about brain health, they think I'm talking about training people with dementia. That's not what I'm talking about today. That's a bit of a different process. Most of the time, you're going to be training people in the preclinical or mild cognitive impairment phases. So preclinical is, one, there's normal aging. So with normal aging, all of our brains change. We have normal cognitive domains that change, like processing speed, certain types of memory, certain types of attention. So at the very least, we should plan to slow those things down, even if you're healthy and not, thinking you're going to get dementia. But the preclinical phase is when there's something called subjective cognitive decline. And you've probably felt this when you're super stressed or you haven't slept well, you feel subjective cognitive decline. Now, is that short-term or is that long-term? It depends. But usually no one else, you can hide it, right? And you can get by. Mild cognitive impairment, on the other hand, is actually diagnosable. It's kind of a mid-stage between you notice something, but others don't. With MCI, usually others notice it. People in your family, your workplace will start to say, I think there's something going on with you here. And then dementia, it affects ADLs through a severe cognitive impairment. And there's different stages of that and tons of different types. One of the main ones being Alzheimer's disease. But there's a lot of different types of dementia that can accommodate Parkinson's disease, medications, surgeries, all sorts of stuff. So it's helpful to know that this is a curve and that we can slow the crap out of this curve. And we want to do everything we can to do that. In addition, there's this thing called cognitive reserve, kind of like physical reserve. The higher your cognitive reserve, the longer your cognitive lifespan, if you will, and the longer we can avoid things like dementia. And there's a bunch of things that go into that cognitive reserve, like modifiable health factors, sleep, nutrition, stress management, but of course, exercise, education level, so stay in school, social support, especially during times like these, positive affect, so mental health is a big concern, stimulating activities and novel experiences, and cognitive training. What I will encourage us to focus on is in the context of resistance training. How can we have social support, i.e. good coaching and a good community, something you're familiar with facilitating, Robert. Positive affect, good mood, enjoying what you're doing. So many people have this bias about resistance training that they're not going to enjoy it, right? And have it be stimulating and novel. We're going to talk about that a lot, but also have it be cognitively demanding. Now, do you have to throw a ball at someone while they're doing a snatch to be able to do cognitive training? No. We're going to talk about what forms of resistance training are likely to be more cognitively demanding than others today. And then as people get older, we actually need to put in more effort. So that what I love about resistance training is it embodies effort, right? You have to overcome an external force to be successful. I think it's a beautiful metaphor for something like neuroplasticity, which is well available to you in your late adulthood, but it requires more effort. And what do people do? As they get older, they slow down, they put in less effort, at least physically and sometimes cognitively. And so I think the benefit of a coach or a trainer is to use resistance training as a literal and as a metaphorical sense of providing more effort, right? And I think people need that right now. Yeah. And here's a cool video to contextualize different aspects of the brain. just because talking about it is different than seeing it. Would have been better with Morgan Freeman narrating, but
Totally.
but pretty amazing,
That's cool.
right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So it's helpful to see the higher level brain regions like the gray matter all the way down to the neuron. And we'll talk about how resistance training affects, those specific levels to a degree. But I think we're all familiar with physical frailty, but there is a relationship with cognitive frailty. And the reason I'm showing this is because resistance training can provide a significant role in this and preventing this and managing it. So if you go around the circle here, we'll start with just sarcopenia. We already know resistance training can help with that. Yeah. What about the bottom, cortisol and testosterone, the endocrine system? Can resistance training help with that? Yes, we know that. And sometimes to a more effective degree than aerobic training, right? Mm-hmm. Inappropriate insulin secretion and pro-inflammatory cytokines. We know resistance training can help with that. And in most of the time, resistance training can help with depression. And yes, it has cardiometabolic benefits and therefore preventing cardiovascular disease. So we already could say that resistance training, if it was the only thing, would probably help a lot here. We know that a variety of things, like we know low intensity modalities like Tai Chi can help with inflammation and cognition and cortisol and all that stuff. We know aerobic training can also help with cardiovascular disease and insulin secretion. So that's why we know each of these things can play a positive role. But if you have a variety of these inputs, aerobic, resistance, skill-based training, you're likely to prevent this. But I think it's encouraging to look at this and confidently say, even for you, Robert, like, yeah, resistance training can do all of this stuff right here, right? So we can help prevent physical and therefore cognitive frailty. Just in terms of how long it takes for things to change, the synapses, the connections between brain cells can change in milliseconds. This is why skill development and good coaching is so important. And then the branching of dendrites can take several hours. New brain cells take several days. Networks of brain cells take several weeks and months. And then higher level brain changes like brain volume changes can take several months and years. So that's why it's important to adhere to a longer term exercise plan, and that would include longer term resistance training. I will show a paper. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a paper called Gait Performance in Dementia. This is actually in patients with dementia, so it's helpful to look at that.
You sent me this before. I remember this one.
Yeah, the effects of the 6-week exercise resistance training program in an adult daycare setting. So they didn't look at too much cognition here. A 6-week resistance training program proved to be insufficient duration, intensity, or specificity. That's where we come in, right? To provide sufficient duration, intensity, and specificity, right? At least for gait outcome measures, with the exception of fast speed gait, apparently that improved. So I think it's important to know, just putting it out there, if we look at not just cognitive or brain health outcomes, but physical outcomes as well, we need more duration and more load, right? And I think that needs to be scaled appropriately. While this is shown in runners, we can see the bottom one is the hippocampus, this part of the brain responsible for learning and memory. Yes, it's with aerobic exercise, but also probably, I don't have imaging specifically for resistance, but we see there's more neurons in the hippocampus compared to sedentary controls. So talking about these different levels of the brain, there's 3 levels. The behavioral, in which we can improve cognition, thinking abilities, memory, attention, processing speed, and also improve mood. Then there's the micro level, these neurons and these connections and these growth factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And then there's the macro level, brain regions, changing brain size or slowing brain declines, and then functional changes. So just like with a hypertrophy program or a strength program, where if you see improvements in strength in the first 2 to 3 weeks without changes in cross-sectional muscle area, that is neural. In a similar fashion, the functional activity of the brain can modify. Remember that synaptic stuff just takes milliseconds. On a broad scale, with the brain activity across different networks, that can be modified relatively quickly and is likely going to be modified before we see an increase in brain volume. So for example, there's been studies looking at the brain activity of an older adult. And if I threw a ball at an older adult, they require more activity to accomplish that same task, where a younger adult might have less activity. They're more efficient. So just like neuromuscular recruitment, right? We want to be able to train functional brain activity to be efficient. We can do that with various types of training, specifically resistance training and in the context of skill, which we'll revisit. But 3 levels: behavioral, micro, and macro. Also, there's 4 domains of cognition just for our, there's a lot more than this, but there's attention, there's processing speed, there's executive functioning, which includes a bunch of things like controlling your impulses, planning, organizing, and then memory. So we're not going to explain these in too much depth, but we will revisit these and talk about how we might be able to target these with different types of resistance training. And that's where I think the opportunity is. And it's the research isn't entirely clear on resistance training of, oh, it just does this. But we will present some research on, is there some specific effects? Well, it's starting to show that, but there's more research that needs to be done. Executive functions, once again, they're like the CEO of the brain. The reason I'm defining them is because resistance training seems to have a particular effect on them, whereas aerobic training does not have as strong as effect on executive functions. So it plays an important role in cognitive control. Like I said, it's like the CEO of the brain. And now if you're experiencing some of these issues, forgetfulness, attention, language, depth perception, judgment, that could all be executive functioning issues. Now this is, executive functions are dysregulated with chronic disease, even if it's not neurological, like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, addiction, mental health issues, but it was also dysregulated with stress and sleep issues, as well as sedentary behavior. So executive functions are important for the context of resistance training. We also looked at gray matter, and I think it's really interesting that some studies are showing that almost over 80% of the brain's gray matter is modifiable by physical activity. So I would like us to go with the same confidence that we know we can improve cross-sectional muscle area in anyone with the right programming, that we can also improve gray matter volumes or brain volumes in anyone with the right prescription, right? I don't think that should be any other, there should be no excuse for us to be able to do that. And this research is really encouraging. And there's some weaknesses with this study, some statistical issues. They didn't really differentiate between physical activity and physical exercise, but it's still dang cool that physical activity might affect this many regions of the brain, almost over 80%. That's crazy to me. So it's like He-Man is like, I have the power, you know?
That's right.
That's right. So to simplify all this, let's just talk about 3 exercise modalities: aerobic, and there's different types of aerobic, strength or resistance training, which we're talking about today, and motor or skill training. Now, my question for you, Robert, can we integrate aerobic training into resistance training?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Can we teach skills in the context of resistance training?
Absolutely.
Then we're going to have a good time. All right. So let's talk about one adaptation from aerobic training primarily. Let's talk about a place or a part of the brain called the hippocampus. If you read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and Exercise, and you read the book Spark, you're going to hear all about the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a deeper brain region, as you can see. and its decline in size and or function is attributed to age-related memory issues. So if people have a memory issue, like mild cognitive impairment, and they get neuroimaging, a volumetric MRI, and it shows a standardized reduction in this area compared to controls and other people their age and gender, that is something that is a diagnostic marker of memory impairment. So we know this area is extremely important for slowing age-related memory declines. We know it increases with size and with general physical activity, perhaps due to more cardiovascular fitness. But we do know in the context of resistance training that we can provide a cardiometabolic benefit and stimulus, right? There's some research coming out showing that resistance training might have a better effect on cardiorespiratory outcomes than aerobic training. It doesn't mean we don't do aerobic training, but I think it's very interesting. I usually present this slide to justify aerobic training, but I'm trying to relate it to resistance training. And there's some interesting correlations of the hippocampus with the lower extremities. And so what if lower extremity strength is not only an assessment, but a solution for hippocampal neurodegeneration? I think that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. In addition, as we look at the hippocampus being potentially involved in locomotion and rhythmic stepping, larger volumes of the hippocampus might equal larger stride time. I wonder how this plays a role in loaded carries, right? Or, or loaded lunges where you're working on stride length or rhythm. So I find this, what if we could target potential brain regions in the context of exercise and more specifically in the context of resistance training? So Robert, if you had the opportunity to get referrals from a neurologist, which you could easily do, and I'm happy to help you set that up, and you know this patient or this client that's been referred to you has low hippocampal volumes, your exercise programming might look a little different for them to reflect that, right? And I think that's a very interesting prospect.
Yeah.
Now, motor fitness, which could be coordinative exercise, skill-based exercise. There's this area called the cerebellum and then the basal ganglia, which is affected by Parkinson's disease, right? Motor fitness can improve size and structure. There's a really interesting article showing that cardiovascular fitness did not affect these regions as much, but coordinative fitness really did. So my question for you, Robert, is can we incorporate coordinative demands into resistance training?
Absolutely. Do it every day.
Right. So there's these specialized skill-based pathways that mediate cognitive improvements. And there's some interesting correlations whereby I have seen people with, there's an area of the basal ganglia called the putamen, and people that present with cognitive issues have a smaller putamen, but nothing else is wrong. And they're only doing aerobic training. They've never done resistance or skill. Mm. And then it's just, so which came first, chicken or the egg? Also, people might say, oh, I'm clumsy. I never do any coordinative movements. That could be a movement flow. That could be dance. That could be Tai Chi. Which came first, the cerebellar atrophy or dysfunction or the lack of this stimulus throughout their lifespan, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it was comorbid with neurodevelopment as a child, who knows? And then there's this interesting thing from the cerebellum. There's this thing called the thalamus in the middle of the brain that connects to the prefrontal cortex, which we'll talk about next. I know that sounds overwhelming, but this back bottom of the brain has a highway to the front upper part of the brain here, the frontal lobe, which resistance training seems to have an effect. So I'm going to drive this home again. We're going to talk about how this part of the brain is affected by resistance training, but if we incorporated skill with resistance, we might get more bang for our buck.
Nice.
Back and front, right?
Yep.
So with resistance training, there seems to be an improvement in the structural and functional aspects of the frontal lobe, which houses these executive functions, the CEO of our brain. And also it makes us unique as humans. And we'll talk about evolution a little bit. And I had the funniest Google search. Did cavemen lift weights? and I'll explain why I Google searched that later. But the answer was yes. And they weren't doing, pink 5-pound dumbbells. They lifted heavy stuff, right? And I think it's interesting. We talk about, running really helped us evolve and eating protein really helped us evolve. But no one talks about weight training helping us evolve. And I think it's interesting that all evolutionary neurobiologists agree, just ask your friendly neighborhood neurobiologist, that the frontal lobe makes us unique as humans. It helped us evolve. It separated us from other mammals. It helped us become who we are today. So why, therefore, do we not discuss the role of resistance training in that regard? Mm-hmm. Right? So some graphics, I'll explain them. First, lift weight. Men lift weight. That increases, that of course sends a stimulus to the muscle. We know that. It increases what's called IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1, increases strength, increases hypertrophy. That IGF-1 goes through the blood and into the brain, and the IGF-1R, which are just IGF-1 receptors, those increase. PAKT is an enzyme that increases angiogenesis, the creation of new blood vessels, helps with cell migration, cell survival, slows down cell death. So it helps, right? That leads to improved executive functions, which we define, improved memory, and reduced fall risk. Okay. This is from a really interesting article I'll send you. To put it more simply, when we do resistance training, let's go to the right. There's the synergistic effects, the mTOR pathway, the CREB pathways, but also brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. So there's this interplay between brain and muscle, things like lactate, right? We know lactate, that is the thing that started all of this. It is a preferred source of metabolism for the brain to have lactate. No one talks about that. Mm-hmm. But there's these other growth factors that come from muscle tension that are likely going to be released during resistance training, like IGF-1, BDNF, and CREB. But we talk about these things in the popular media as just aerobic training. Nobody gives resistance training credit for having these beneficial and perhaps unique effects. Of course, that leads to cognition and muscle fitness, which functionally integrate to decrease chronic disease, not just dementia, chronic disease. And I think that's helpful to know. This is much more complex, but resistance training does stuff. We know that. So this is it's a much more complex view to what we showed earlier. I'm not going to define all this, but just to give an appreciation of, wow, this stuff is complex. These pathways, these interplays are just for resistance training. Okay. This is dope. Moment of silence for the cellular neurobiology here. Right. You know, we're going to see some familiar names like PAKT, IGF-1, BDNF, CREB, all that stuff, even mTOR. So we don't have to dive into this, but we know it's complex and cool and helpful.
Where were you when I was in college, man? I would have understood this so much better.
What year were you in college?
You were probably like in high school when I was going to college. How old are you?
I'm 28.
Yeah, so I got 12 years on you, and you're like a borderline.
He's a 91 kid
going through this. Yeah, I think this is pretty awesome, man. Like it's a way of looking at what we're doing at a much deeper level, and then just saying like, yeah, of course. You're like, no, really, here's exactly how we're defining how this works for us.
And you said that you wish it was in college. I wish it was in my college. It's still not in college, right? Yeah. I'm really happy because I had a PhD from Cal State Long Beach in the kinesiology department, just finished my course. And she's like, oh, I might incorporate one or two of these things in my class. I'm like, let's incorporate all of it. Let's make a whole course. Are you kidding me? So I wish, because it would really help us as a fitness industry specialize and increase our value, especially now. What I'm finding is, I don't want to divert, but my business has not been affected because brain health is a priority. It's essential, right? Whereas people have seen fitness as a luxury, and things like weight loss, knee pain, aesthetics, they're not important right now, or as important right now to people, right? But brain health, if people come out of this more declined in cognition, they don't want that to happen. So my business is not affected. So my message to the fitness industry is that if you add these skill sets and knowledge, it's better job security. Absolutely. And there's a massive population of people with and without neurological insults or deficits or conditions that need this. And I have a hard time finding people to refer to. That is a problem, right? Gotcha. And so I just want to be able to refer people, and doctors want to be able to refer people, feeling safe that they've done their due diligence and can provide optimal brain health for that individual. Whether they're recommending exercise, health coaching, providing exercise sessions, even if it's just education, keeping them active, right? And also there's probably, especially if you're working with older adults, the percentage of those people that should have a memory or cognitive assessment because of their risk or to demonstrate your success with them is pretty much everyone. right? And so the way we start this practice is educating people the value of getting assessments of brain health so that we can further describe our value in that role. But also, if you sent like all of your clients to a neurologist, if they're ready and willing, and they got memory evaluations, if they're healthy, they're going to thank you. If they're not healthy or there's something that they can slow down, you're going to jump in and they're going to thank you, right? So, I mean, these are huge opportunities.
Nice.
Another complicated graphic, same thing, but demonstrates the role of the liver a little bit more, which I think is interesting. And then its relationship to the brain in terms of angiogenesis, the creation of new blood vessels, neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, cognition, sleep, and mood. Mm-hmm. And so when people ask me, because I'm like a brain health coach, it's not just exercise, but what the first thing I always recommend is exercise, because it gets you get the most bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. I can talk about sleep hygiene, which will help with everything. But I know if exercise is going to improve your sleep and help you manage stress and have these direct effects, sounds like a good investment of time and effort, right?
Number one, yeah.
Okay, here's what's really cool. There's something called corticospinal excitability, the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. I just found this study last night. I don't know the exact dosage or methodology. I think it was 4 weeks maybe. So there's a control group, the black bar. There's the slow-paced resistance training or strength training. The visual motor skill, I think it was like tossing a ball. And then non-paced strength training. Look which one has the most corticospinal excitability
there you go.
At both time points.
Nice.
Now, does this mean power training isn't good for? No, it is. But I just think this is really interesting that, okay, maybe different types of strength training have different effects. But I think that if we look at ball sports as being the visual motor component here, in resistance training being compared to that, resistance training seems to help. Or what if we did both? What if you did your resistance training and then you superset that with a reaction time drill throwing a ball at someone? Get both of it in there, right? And Cody Stipe from FAI talks a lot about power training and fall reduction, and I know you do too. Mm-hmm. But what we don't talk about there is corticospinal excitability. That's the functional aspect of all this. And so when we look at the neurological adaptations of power training, this is at the root of it. And it has a lot to do with the brain. So I think this is really interesting to consider in our acute variables in our program design. We had a chat.
Yeah, Diane just said she's got to run off to another training, but
it's recorded, I think.
Yeah, so good to see it. Yeah, we're on demand, so we'll get
we're on demand.
We are on demand.
Mental health benefits, we know it's there. Executive control, we've defined. Self-esteem, less anxiety, cognition, quality of sleep, memory, less fatigue. I'm running through this not to devalue it. In fact, I'd say it's more important than anything I've ever talked about, because if you have a good experience, you have good mental health, you're more likely to do it again, and therefore get those brain health benefits long-term. So, but it is extremely important in the context of mental health. We know that resistance training can play a role. This is, I think, where coaching is super, super important. The ability to have a coach to work through your struggles, customize something, and have that positive experience is absolutely critical to mediating the benefits of resistance training on the brain and mental health. Okay, here's the evolution, all right? So this is called the adaptive capacity model, presented by Dr. David Reichland, who just wrote an article in Scientific American, I think one of the past 2 or 3 issues, about exercise in the brain, and at the very end talks about combining cognitive training. He is a good friend and a brilliant scientist, and he talks about spatial memory and navigation, other types of cognition like executive function being necessary in the context of evolution. So a lot of people say, oh, long distance running is how we evolve. Without long distance running, we'd be screwed. But no one talks about the input of cognition, right, in that role. So in order to hunt, we had to use our cognitive and sensory and attention systems and physical systems. In that, it was having to carry the spear. And while it wasn't carrying a barbell or doing a loaded carry, you had to carry that dead animal back, right? If you went through all of this trouble to crawl and crouch and hunt the animal and plan and then chase and outrun it and then sprint and finalize the kill, right? And you can't carry the thing back because you're weak. What was the point?
Yeah.
What was the point, right?
Yeah.
And there's got to be ways that you're varying that carry. You got the head on the loaded carry like a kettlebell. You got it on your back, right? Yeah. I know you do that in your spare time.
Oh yeah, totally.
And then to build shelters and to like, we can just theorize about all the roles that resistance training played in evolution here, right? But this is literally justifying why cognitive demands, and we'll talk about how resistance training can also provide those cognitive demands, went with evolution. And it wasn't just protein or running, it was these other things as well.
I love the hairiness of the diagram on the body too. It's a spatchy little, totally caveman like.
That's me right now. All right, TMI. So let's talk about two different types of skills, and let's apply this to resistance training. So there's closed skills, stable, predictable, movements have a very clear beginning and end, performer knows what to do and when. Then there's open skills, the environment's constantly changing, movements have to be continually adapted, and they're predominantly externally paced, i.e. a sport like tennis. For closed skills, this is an example of closed skill resistance training. Based on this, Robert, what might be an example of open skill resistance training?
Snatch.
Okay. Maybe even a loaded carry with an obstacle course, or they're a loaded carry and you're having them change directions, or something where they're interacting with a partner or the coach, and it's an unstable, unpredictable environment. But we know, like I know people don't go to your gym and get on exercise machines, do they?
We don't even have them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's not to say they're bad. They're very helpful. But in terms of skill development, you are teaching skills day in, day out.
Yeah.
Right.
And I love the, you articulate it better than I do, but you don't know the anticipation of knowing where the reaction of the skill where it comes from the partner throwing to you to reaction balls to whatever it is, where it's undetermined. You can't anticipate, right?
And that's an open skill.
Yep. I love doing that stuff. And it's even just simple things like on calls, you carry a direction until I call you to change it, so they don't know it's coming.
And that's why you've been doing this cognitive stuff, just defining it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's where you and I hit it off right from the get-go, because you started to say stuff. I'm like, yeah, I do that. I just didn't know what to call it, right? And that's where your definition of all this and progression of it really makes a lot of sense of how we can apply.
It feels good to name things.
Absolutely.
And describe their value.
Yeah, it sure does.
So here's the fun part: resistance training as cognitive training. So there's a Canadian scientist named Dr. Teresa Lou Ambrose out of the Mobility Falls and Cognition Lab, I believe University of Vancouver. She's probably one of the most prominent researchers in strength training in older adults and cognition.
Nice.
Most strength training techniques require motor learning, planning, sustained attention, and procedural memory. Procedural memory is like, how do I do it? What are the steps? Step 1, step 2, step 3, right? Training that requires more open skills require adapting to unexpected stimuli, just like we described some examples there, and learning novel skills, bells, clubs, bags, barbells, complex lifts, offer opportunities for more unique mental demands.
Nice.
So yes, we can do the balls and all that stuff. That's extremely important. What I do is extremely important with combined cognitive physical training. But I think the benefit of resistance training is that people didn't really recognize it as having these inherent cognitive demands. You cannot watch TV while doing this stuff. You can't, but you can do it on an exercise machine, and you can do it if it's a leg press, and you can do it if you're on an exercise bike. Does that mean those things are bad? No, but it does mean that if you can't watch a TV during it, then it's more cognitively demanding.
Yeah.
And I think you would probably argue for your techniques, Robert, that nobody watches TV during your sessions.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe during the rest periods, but that depends.
Yeah.
You do have a TV.
We do. There's actually, we have one and we never use it. It's never on.
Okay, good.
Yeah. It's never on. I use it for webcasts. That's it.
Yeah. Now there is an opportunity to use that in throwing up some cues up there, like directional cues. And
yeah, I've heard you talk about that before too.
We'll talk about that. Anyway, so let's revisit the stages of skill learning. So we've probably heard this before. There's the cognitive phase, the associative phase, the autonomous phase. In the cognitive phase, it's new. In the associative phase, it's sort of new. It's still challenging, but we're getting used to it. In the autonomous phase, you don't need to think about it anymore. Now, in the cognitive phase, the experience and practice is very low. But in the working memory demands, let's just simplify, the cognitive demands, that's why it's called the cognitive stage, is very high. So typically in sport, we hate this stage because it means you're bad. But in brain health, this is what we're after. We're after novel skills because remember, it contributes to cognitive reserve. And we want to have, if we want more drills with more cognitive demands, we spend more time in the cognitive phase. Now, there's a balance here of frustration and skill. And that's why we contextualize it in the sense of a flow state. So we have challenges on the left-hand side, we have skills on the bottom. And so we want to have a balance of challenge and skills, ideally with skills increasing, ideally with challenge increasing. This is a psychomotor justification for a psychomotor version of progressive overload. That's what this is.
Gotcha.
And if we are in that flow state, both psychologically and metaphorically, there is a plethora of neurochemicals that are released. Oxytocin, dopamine, acetylcholine that are beneficial to the brain and have a good experience, leading to positive affect. So it's kind of this circular cocktail of events that if it's coached well and designed well, we can really have a lot of benefits theoretically.
So you had shared with me, this was a while ago, but you'd shared with me an article that showed very similar to this. The more autonomic we became with the skill, the less cognitive involvement we had because the mind basically was getting bored with the act of doing. And by continually increasing to vary or change that skill just on occasion would bring us back into that middle stage or the cognitive stage.
Yeah.
So it was, but if I remember correctly, it was like doing it twice. Like it wasn't, you can't repeat the same work,out like 6 weeks in a row. It was like by the second day, I got it.
It's got to be a balance, and I'm not poo-pooing routines. But we will talk about like when people learn an exercise, you do want to give them success. You don't want to like, okay, you haven't gotten used to it yet, but let's switch it. Like you don't want to frustrate them. But to a degree, like I've had a lot of patients come to me and say they've been on the same routine for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And they're exercising, yet they're presenting with cognitive decline.
Well, because the level of mastery is over. I mean, they got a PhD in doing the exact same shit. Yeah. So it's time for a new stimulus, right?
Yeah. So if you were in school and you stayed at the same grade level, how would you progress?
Yeah.
How would you progress? And for some reason, we look at exercise differently. We say, oh, it's just, 150 minutes of aerobic exercise. Just do it. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give me diarrhea just thinking about it. All right. Okay. So how might different resistance training drills be specific to cognitive domains? And this is what I got to dream up last night. I'm really excited about. So
did you make this just for us?
I did.
Oh, you're awesome.
But it's also selfish because I'm updating my course this week, and I want to add more to this.
Nice. Love it.
So memory, how might we target memory with resistance training? We'll talk about, if you did, 3 months, how might it impact your memory? It seems to be sex specific, which is interesting, which probably has to do with the mediation of the endocrine system. But if we were to do movement sequencing, loaded flows, procedural recall, let me define that. Choreography. Does choreography require memory? Yes. What is the equivalent of choreography in resistance training? Right? It depends. There is step 1, step 2, step 3 for, say, an Olympic lift. That is procedural, right? Do this, then this, then this. If you had to ask your client or your patient, how do you do this drill? They have to tap into procedural memory, okay? Depending on how you taught that will determine its effectiveness, and also the practice, how much they've practiced it, right? And then loaded flows, lunge matrix with an overhead press on every one, right? They need to coordinate that. They need to think about which direction, especially if there's an order to it that you've defined. Movement sequencing in general will require certain aspects of memory. Also, so that's just in the context of a technique, right? Now, if you do that once, will it just improve their memory forever? No, but it's going to require memory demands. Now, we know that if we had a 3 to 6 month resistance training program, depending on the individual, specifically their gender, that can likely improve memory. Processing speed or reaction time. Power drills seem to, I mean, that makes sense, right? Makes sense. Eccentrics. So that corticospinal excitability slide showed slow-paced resistance training. We typically don't think of eccentrics as improving reaction time, yet it seems to have an impact on corticospinal excitability. And then high-intensity interval training. So this whole entire slide is just vouching for variability in the context of resistance training, right? Then executive functions, open skill learning, which we define, unexpected events, and coaching. Coaching has literally been defined as the facilitation of self-directed neuroplasticity. In other words, self-directed neuroplasticity is learning. Facilitation comes from the Italian, Spanish roots of facile, which is easy. Make it easy to learn. Done, right? That's what coaching is from a neuroscience standpoint. So it's interesting because if people have trouble planning or controlling their impulses or paying attention or controlling their frustrations, that's all a dysfunction of executive functions. Coaches help with all that. They plan for you. They cue you. They console you. They help you get from A to B. The coach is an outsourced freelancer for executive functions in many ways. And the way, therefore, coaching, you being there, Robert, provides cognitive demands, right? And so whether it's just coaching them to learn new skills, that's beneficial, or if it's challenging them by adding stimuli on top of those skills in ways we discussed, change directions, et cetera.
Yeah.
Then attention, once again, you can't watch TV during some of this stuff, especially during unstable movements. You have to pay more attention to unstable movements, whether it's something with a fluid-filled sack or it's something like a sand-based sack or a bag. Cueing, if it's an internal or an external cue, you have to pay attention to it, right? Motor control, part of cueing, right? If we have to control movement and focus on form, that requires attention. These are all cognitive demands that you will not get on an exercise bike. You will not. So I think we have.
This is neuromuscular facilitation at its best. I mean, this is exactly the breakdown of each piece and what we do. But we, as strength coaches, don't think of it in these terms of each breakdown process. You know what I mean? We're just looking at it as, is this challenging? Are they capable of doing? And what could we regress or progress? You know, I think sometimes we get, what's that saying, you don't see the trees from the forest kind of a thing. Like you get so focused on us trying to accomplish certain tasks, so we're not really seeing all these other little things that we are accomplishing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can get very stuck.
Or could accomplish.
We haven't added more load in 4 months or whatever it is. It's like, look at all the other things here that we can be addressing or we are addressing. Maybe we're just not even testing for it to see if it's working or not.
Well, that's right. There needs to be, so the reason resistance training doesn't have as much research is because the whole aerobics era, right? In terms of exercise in the brain. And aerobics are sometimes just easier to control for. And a lot of the resistance training studies don't incorporate the stuff we're talking about. So a lot of what I'm presenting is theoretical here, but based on principles and some early research. So the problem is they're not going to study Robert Lincoln's gym. They're going to study what's easiest to control, usually in the form of bands and like what you might call resistance training is not what a lot of research calls resistance training, especially for older adults. So this is where I think it's an opportunity for our fields to meet.
Gotcha.
To a degree. And I think there's two distinct, well, that's one opportunity. There's two other distinct opportunities on behalf of the clients. One of them is if a client has cognitive assessment and you find one of these domains is more impaired than the other four, and you use some of these techniques perhaps to focus on that, and that improves, that is precision medicine. Do you see how that might work? So, i.e., someone has a processing speed deficit, which sometimes is one of the earliest things that we see. It's reaction time or processing speed does decline normally with age, but also it might precede other changes in cognition. It's a very early marker. I happen to find people with processing speed deficits don't do things like HIIT or power drills. They don't. Which came first, chicken or the egg, right? And so if Under that context, I recommend HIIT training and strength training, sometimes as a multimodal in the same session type of approach. So that's one opportunity. And honestly, Robert, there are technologies available to us now that are affordable and within scope of practice for us to do this in our gyms. Like there's a thing where you can take a 5-minute cognitive assessment before your session and look at it after, and it's a validated test of cognition. You can't diagnose, but you can do this as easily as blood pressure now. And so it's an opportunity for us to do that.
Yeah, that's Matt just put a comment up here asking how can we as trainers assess motor improvement and discuss domains. And I'm sure we only have like 4 or 5 minutes left here, and I know you have. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I know you can, but I'm looking at this thinking if people really want to continue this more and such, yeah, you got a billion slides of them here. But
well, actually, I'm almost done here.
Okay, but looking at, I mean, I know to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about your course a little bit. I think you have a huge component of that it is going to teach, as you just talked about, techniques where we can do pre and post testing from session to session
so it could be in a questionnaire, but there's 3 distinct technologies I might recommend. The first one's called CogniView, and I'll type these in the chat. The first one's called CogniView. The second one is called Cambridge Brain Sciences, and the third one's called Brain Check. And they all have their costs and benefits and strengths and weaknesses and all that. But we can type those in or send them in a follow-up email. All of this is my course, by the way. It's pulled from my course. Some of it's unique to the presentation. This chart specifically is very, very busy. We're not going to review it, but it's justifying why different types of stimuli and exercise modalities is good for a whole brain approach. Mm-hmm. So the general exercise recommendations, because I want to talk about what to do about all this really quick, and then we'll wrap up. 150 minutes to 300 minutes a week. We've heard that, okay? Multi-domain is going to be better than single domain. So it's not about doing just resistance training. It's that resistance training is a crucial element. Like if you have carbs, fats, and proteins, right? It's like right. You need this macronutrient. And then it takes about 52 hours for people to see significant cognitive benefits regardless of exercise modality in older adults. 52 hours. That could be over 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. Additional exercise prescription elements, 3 times a week for resistance training seems to be better for cognition than twice a week. Good news. Exercise may be sex specific. Men improve memory, but women improve executive functions. There it is, right? More research is needed. Resistance training can include a lot of variables: speed of movement, complexity of skills, sequencing of movement. And these are all the variables we need to be aware of. The bottom 3 are atypical. We typically don't read about these or hear about these or think about these. The skill. So yes, we have sets and reps and intensity, but what is the skill that you're teaching? On a scale of 1 to 10, how cognitively demanding is that skill? Scale of 1 to 10, how novel is it? And then what is the environment? Is it a partner session? Is it a coaching thing? Is it a self-directed thing? Is it a positive environment, right? These are things we need to consider. I think we've talked about that. Here's some additional resources if you want to learn how to train special populations. For example, being able to work with people with depression or mental illness or addiction. That book on the left is great. Parkinson's disease, cardiovascular disease. The NSCA has a great book on training special populations.
That's a great book.
Additional resources. Of course, shameless self-promotion. I have a resource that I've worked really hard on. If you guys want to check it out, you can go to brainhealthtrainer.com, use code BRAIN300 for half off, which we're doing in the context of COVID right now. I have the pleasure of doing this with the Functional Aging Institute. Of course, Robert, you, myself, and a couple other fine young gentlemen are working on something pretty amazing as well. Yes, if you want to contact me, here's my contact with the coupon code up there and the website, Instagrams, cell phone, and email.
Nice. Ryan, I can't thank you enough, man. I feel every time we talk, I feel like I learn a whole bunch of stuff, but I also feel very inadequate at the same time, going like, God, there's so much more I should be doing.
I'm the one with consistent self-confidence issues. What are you talking about?
It was just great. And the fact that you like put together some stuff for us, just personal for that, and picking it out of your course, this is really cool, man. I really appreciate it. I had no idea. I mean, just to let you all know, like behind the curtain here, I had no idea what he was going to present today. I just had a bunch of stuff I was going to ask him. And right before we got on, on, you know, as we started on, he goes, "Oh, I'll just share my screen when you're ready." And this was, I mean, above and beyond. So I'm blown away, brother. Thank you.
I've been wanting to do this for a while, man. So while we've alluded to in conversation, we know that exercise is good for the brain. We know resistance training is good for the brain. But I want to use this opportunity to really dive in, and trust me, it wasn't that hard to do some specific research. And I was watching Curb Your Enthusiasm while I was doing this. So, but I did want to spend at least a few hours researching, like, okay, if we were to really change our resistance training programs for brain health, what would it look like? So I had a good time doing that, and I think this content is going to be the first of more content specifically geared towards resistance training. I hope we can do a lot more with this.
It reminds me, when I had my first hip replacement, my mom bought me the whole collection of the House series. And I remember the one where House wanted to get in shape, and he keeps talking about his hippocampus is being overwhelmed or something. And I'm like, I wish I could find that episode now to send it to you, because there's like 180 episodes. But I got to find that and be able to send it to you.
I would love to see that. Maybe it was his amygdala.
Something like that. Yeah, he's talking about.
They are next to each other.
He's training his legs, and his legs are burned, and he just keeps talking about how this is affecting his brain. And
That's awesome. Maybe he called this way before we did.
Yeah, I remember. I just like, this could be perfect for that. So anyway,
Benedict Cumberbatch, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you see quite a few comments up here, people saying thank you and how great this was. And we've also had a couple ask about the slides. Is this something that?
Of course. Yeah, I'll send you a PDF right now.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm at the end of the week, everybody, I'm going to take all of our guests, anybody that provides content to us like this, and I'll do just one big Dropbox and send it to all of you. We do that every week, anytime we do some education stuff like this. So we'll put that in there with Ryan, anything else that he wants to provide to us, any other articles or whatever else you got, my man. I really appreciate it. So yeah, we'll throw that up there. So Kim, I got you, and Elaine, and everybody else, Miles, it was amazing. Thank you. Yeah, it was really good, right, man? I'm super impressed, and even more excited for our joint venture coming up here, which we can't talk too much about, but we're very close. Yeah. So we'll be cutting some ribbons here pretty soon. We're excited about that. So thank you, my man. I appreciate you, buddy. You have a great day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate you, and we will see you tomorrow. Dr. Mike will be on here. Jonathan Mike.
I gotta say, the first time I ran into Dr. Jonathan Mike was at the first inaugural Neurosports conference, and he was presenting about sleep in the brain. So that dude is a sleeper, pun intended, when it comes to cognition and brain health.
Because you were talking about the benefits with eccentric training in there too. And I'm like, I'm going to bring up some cognitive components with them tomorrow. But I remember you texted me and then you were like, hey, I met this guy named John here at the event. And not 5 minutes later, he texts me. He's like, I think I met your boy, Ryan. He mentioned you. I'm like, I'm going back and forth like, okay, they found each other.
I was really excited to see him on this week. So I'll probably be on there harassing him. And you got Pete McCall, who's probably been one of my earliest supporters.
Yeah,
you got some amazing people this week.
People have been great. Everybody I asked, they're just like, yeah, let's set it up. I mean, it's been really cool to do this, and I know people really enjoy it. I enjoy it. I'm learning from all you guys, and to share your time and content like this, I just can't thank you enough. So thank you, bud. Have a great day. Everybody else have a great day. Thank you for joining us. And again, look for slides and videos as well. We'll send you all the copies of everything at the end of the week.
All right,
everybody, take
Thanks,
care,
Robert. See ya.
You.